Welcome back to another episode of the Wet Dreams podcast. I'm your host, Jose Gonzalez. I'm a mental health counselor and a sex therapist.
And I'm Dr. Brad Hinman. I'm also a mental health counselor and a sex therapist.
Cool. Today, it occurred to me that we've been doing podcasts and we went straight into things, but we never actually really talked about us, or we never talked about what we do as sex therapists, or like how we got into it and all that kind of stuff. And I thought that'd be an interesting episode, whether or not people want to hear it or not. Right. We're still going to do
it. We want to hear it.
Yeah, we want to hear it back for ourselves. Reflect on our journey. So I mean, so I thought today we'd talk about, again, how we got into the sex therapy, what inspired us, but then also some of the challenges that we may have, how sex therapy is different than regular therapy. It is regular therapy, but with a twist, I guess, if you will. And that kind of stuff, just a little bit of background. So what got you into sex therapy? Well, thinking about it, I'm sure there's a whole story that you got, but let's hear it.
So actually, I was in marriage and family therapy supervision, because I'm a licensed professional counselor and a licensed marriage and family therapist and a sex therapist. So I was in marriage and family therapy supervision. A friend of mine in the same group, supervision, she said that she was thinking of either doing, I think, EMDR or this sex therapy. And I'm like, sex therapy? What's that? Like tell me about that. And so I was already at that time seeing guys with like pornography use, problematic pornography use, problematic sexual behavior. And so the more she talked about it, the more interesting it became to me. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, hey, I want to do that.
Like she was going to do like a training for it? Or was she just thinking about doing it like?
She was thinking of doing the University of Michigan.
Oh, okay, the University of Michigan one, yeah. Yep.
And so I said, hey, do you want a buddy? And so she's like, yeah.
Nice.
And so we signed up together. We were in it together. So
nice. That's cool. What'd you think when you first started doing a training? Because I know you had like throughout your life or with your kids, you were already like pretty open about stuff. Like you almost did it before it was a thing or before it was popular. So I know that. But yeah, what were your impressions when you did the program or started it?
It was more like I found my people. Mm-hmm. Like I definitely had that feeling like, oh, there's other people that think like I do, you know? So it was cool to find my people. Also, like I felt that before I went, that I was pretty open about stuff, but there was people there that were way more open than I am even. So, so I was like, oh, wow, that's cool, you know?
Uh-huh.
So it was a little intimidating, but just because it's a lot to talk about sex. But they kind of wear down your resistance on purpose, you know, they get you used to talking about it
or whatever. Bring down your sensitivity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that was cool.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and for me, it was you that got me into it, basically. I think like, it's funny, I'll tell people it's been similar experiences throughout my schooling and all that, where like, for example, I did my undergrad, I did political science, you know that, but I didn't end up finishing with it. I just finished my degree, but I was going to go to law school. It didn't work out. So then when I went into counseling in the first place, I was thinking about counseling and social work, and I wasn't sure. I met with the like head of the counseling department and thought like, oh, she was pretty cool. And so I was like, okay, I'll choose that. And it wasn't until I got to my first class in counseling that I was like, oh, okay, well, this is where I need to be. You know, I didn't actually know if it was going to work out or not. So I'm like, oh, we'll see. And I feel like with sex therapy, it was the same thing. Like you had said, you know, you should take this class. You were teaching the class at Andrews or whatever. And you were like, oh, you should teach this class. And if you're anything like me or something like that, you said, like, I know we're similar, so I think you would like this, you know? And I thought, okay, like, let me try it. Like, sounds cool. And then when I took your initial like intro class that I was like, oh, okay, this is like where I need to be. This is like again my people, you know what I mean? Like this is the stuff I want to talk about. And I always like enjoyed. I mean, I say this often, but I always enjoyed making people uncomfortable. Like I did it anyways, whether it was sex comments or whether it was just pushing things in general. Like I always enjoyed that. And then this was another level of like, oh, I can make people really uncomfortable and see how they squirm. You know, I promise I'm not like a psycho, but it was enjoyable. Yeah. So then we did the same program, University of Michigan program, and had similar experience. It was pretty intimidating at first just because there's different disciplines and like doctors, physicians, teachers, like it's a multidisciplinary thing, which is cool. But then at the same time, like, oh, okay, well, this is kind of intimidating. But yeah, I think I agree with that. It was kind of a slow road to like open yourself up and be less sensitive towards the topic or whatever. Yeah. What does it take? I mean, we kind of alluded to it. We kind of talked about it. What does it take to be a sex therapist or to do the things that we're doing now? What has it taken up to this point?
The program that we did, it was 11 months. I think it was, when I added it up, I think it was 192 classroom hours that we spent over the course of that 11 months. Yeah, it was a lot. And so that's just the program. Then when you finish, you have to get supervision, right, from a licensed sex therapist, supervising your cases. And so I can't remember the number of hours, but I think it took, because you do individual supervision and group supervision.
I think it was like 100 hours. No, something like that. Maybe that's just group. Yeah, there was like a certain amount, a total, but then a certain amount was group, and then that was like a cap on the amount of group, and then the rest had to be individual. I forget how much it was, but
yeah, because I want to say it took like a year or two to get the supervision done. Mm-hmm. I mean, more than a year, probably two.
Mm-hmm.
And then you put together all of your materials. Now you can probably do it online, but you had to gather.
Back in my day.
Right, get off my lawn. You had to put together all the materials, the supervision forms, all the classes that you took, all the certificates you have, and all that stuff. You had to compile it and then send it in to the accrediting body to be a certified sex therapist. And so it's kind of a big deal. And this is after you get your master's degree.
Right. And you have to be post grad for 2 years or whatever, I think minimum, at least when we did it.
Yep. And so I had a PhD at that time. So this was after my PhD, another year after that of education. But it's a lot of really helpful stuff. A lot of, it gives us the tools to be able to talk to people about a lot of different sexual problems.
For sure. And again, I think the big thing you said, and this is a theme, this is a thing for anyone to take from this, is also part of the value was the desensitization of talking about those kind of topics, whether you're just whoever, or whether you're a counselor listening to this or whatever. I think the biggest takeaway was that, like, the more comfortable you can be, / at least appear to be, the more comfortable you can be in these topics, the better, or the more effective it's going to be. I think that was, I mean, of course we got trained a lot of other things because, like you said, 190 hours, 92, but part of the value was comfort in talking, whether it be in the class or to our cohort or after or whatever. Like, that was a huge part for me, at least.
Yeah. I think they're trying to get us so that we're not like, oh, you said nipple, ha ha ha, yeah. Trying to desensitize us to that, so we can hear those words without giggling like a 12-year-old, So.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I was thinking about was like, okay, how does sex therapy compare to regular therapy? I mean, again, I said it is regular therapy with a twist,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not quite regular therapy because we have had people that will refer us, other therapists that will refer to us, for a sex issue or whatever, So clearly, it's different. How would you conceptualize that?
Probably the biggest difference is, um, what are we calling non-sex therapists?
That makes me feel like you're saying they don't have sex. I don't know why
Right.
that went to my mind. Sorry.
So therapists who don't have this certification,
Right. Who don't specialize in sex
there you
therapy.
go. Yes. They more than likely will not have had any classes training them on how to talk to clients about sex. Yeah, correct. That's an important distinction to take note of, is that if you go to a non-sex therapist, they probably will not have had any classes whatsoever in how to talk to clients about sex. What that means then for clients is that these therapists are now relying on their own personal values and beliefs, and then dictating therapy based on their own, how they were raised, the messages they got about sex, and all that kind of stuff, which was probably none, again, if they were raised in the United States. And so that's the biggest difference, is like what the therapist is bringing into session, right? We have the same degree as other therapists have, plus we have a year of additional training on top of that, where other therapists will not have had any training in that. But I don't think that was really your question.
No, that was definitely part of it.
Right. Like, as for what we do differently in session, the way I conceptualize it is we're just open to talk about sex. Like, that's a topic that you can bring into session, where, again, if you're going to a therapist that doesn't have this training, they're likely going to change the subject, right? Because it's uncomfortable for them. So they're going to indicate to you passively through, or they're going to imply that talking about sex is not something that I want to deal with in session.
Right. And I've heard that often, or the range of things when I'm referred to someone that has from a different therapist is like, they'll say things like, we dealt with the anxiety a lot, or we talked about the trauma a lot, but this, we didn't really touch on this.
Right.
And I've heard that a bunch of times, which makes sense. I mean, it wasn't really delved into because the therapist, arranged in their comfort, some more better than others, of course, but that's really more comes down to their personal beliefs, like you said, or their preference. Maybe they're more of an open person anyways, so it wouldn't have changed anything. So it depends. But
I think typically, like in therapy, a client might say, well, I hooked up last night with somebody, and the therapist might make note of that, but then move on to something else, where we are more likely to be like, who did you have, even hooked up, like, does that mean you had sex? Right.
Right. Define that. Yeah.
And did you orgasm? Did your partner orgasm? Like, how long did the sex last? Like, was it enjoyable for both of you? Did you get consent?
The hookup.
Yes. How do you feel now after it's over? Right. So we're going to ask lots of questions, and we're comfortable asking those questions. Whereas another therapist may not be comfortable asking those questions. But not only are we comfortable, we want to know the answers to those questions because it's going to help us with treatment, right? And so I think we're like I said, we're more open to discussing these things, having these conversations, but also more qualified to help people with problems, right? It's like in this podcast, we talk a lot about what we call out of control sexual behavior or problematic sexual behavior, but that's not all the sex therapist deals with. We deal with sexual pain, or like recovery after surgery, or, if they have cancer or some other kinds of surgery, it can affect their sex life that way. And they're going to we can talk about desire discrepancy and like orgasm. Right. You know, we can talk about, and we do talk about lots of different issues with clients. And so it's not, and it's not all sex all the time, right? Like our clients do talk about normal things too, like anxiety and depression,
right.
Which can also affect sex, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
it's the way I look at it, like we deal with the whole person, sex included,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not just parts of a person.
Yes, right. And that's that's funny that you mentioned that, like, we don't always talk about sex. There's always, for me, there's always that balance of like, depends on what the client is. Like, for example, if it's one of our guys with like out of control sexual behavior, I'm a little bit more intentional about, okay, how does that relate back to like your recovery, quote unquote, or like your dealing with porn? Like, how does that come back to that? Right. You know, I'm more intentional about that. But then sometimes, depending on the client or whatever, I'm not as intentional, or not as every session, like, bring it back to sex, bring it back to sex. You know what I mean? I would like to, because I like to talk about sex and I want to talk about it all the time. But if they bring up something regular, I'm not always necessarily bringing it back to sex, at least in that session, you know, probably at some point. But you know what I mean? So it's that balance of like, okay, talking about sex all the time, but definitely we can talk about other things, and other things are important to talk about in the session as well, you know?
Well, and a lot of, yeah, so I think that is true. And I think the opposite is also true. Like I think sometimes couples will come and they'll say, we need to talk about communication. And then, you know, so that's their presenting problem, is communication. And so then I ask every couple that I see, when's the last time you had sex? And then when's the last time you had sex before that? That's really the important question. You know, because a lot of times for some reason they'll come in, oh, we had sex yesterday or this morning, right? Well, when's the last time you had sex before that? A month ago, right? So then that really tells you something, right?
Yep.
And so, and then of course I ask, like I said before, did you enjoy it? Did you orgasm? Did your partner orgasm? All those kinds of things like that. So then by asking those questions, it discovers a sexual issue that they might be struggling with, that they weren't comfortable bringing up in the first session, right? They use the communication as a disguise to get in here. And then
as a cloak.
Right. And then sex is one of the major problems, right, in the relationship. So, which is tied to communication. It all comes back to communication.
Right. But I think the you know, the biggest thing that I found is that, you know, a lot of times there can be a lot of other things that can be dealt with. And I guess, you know, we're humans, so it's complex, but a client will have done work in these other sections, and then invariably sex is the last thing they haven't worked on, but also the biggest thing and also the biggest issue, you know. It's just so interesting. Like, you could get some progress, you know, working in those regular things, you know, and that you might feel good and whatever. But then a lot of times that the sex part of it, or the sex trauma or the sexual dysfunction, whatever, that's going to still stay there because you haven't dealt with it. And that's going to affect everything else, and arguably at times be the biggest issue that you actually didn't really deal with. You know what I mean? It's crazy.
Well, it's very freeing to clients to not have to hide a subject from us, right? That they can talk about sex. We're willing to talk about sex. We're qualified to talk about sex. So I think it's very freeing to clients. They've told me that I don't have to hide this part of myself.
Yeah. Right.
Because that involves kink and everything, like all the other stuff too. It's not.
Yep.
Right.
Especially like fetishes and stuff, you know, it seems like hard for people that I've talked to. They feel relieved to be able to say that, you know, they've never told anyone else, you know? So what are some of the challenges in being a sex therapist or doing this kind of work that we do? What are some challenges? I saw your mind going. You're like,
the first thing that popped into my head was, I get asked fairly often. Well, I shouldn't. Depends on your definition of fairly often. I've been asked several times.
Once.
Yeah, more than once. Do you have sex with your clients? No, we do not have sex with our clients. We don't watch our clients have sex.
Nope.
We don't watch it. We don't want them to videotape it and show
Right.
us. Like,
We don't watch porn with our clients.
with our
Yeah.
So it's not like that, right? It's therapy. We just happen to be talking about sex, right? Sometimes, most of the time, all the time, not all the time. So I think that's a big misconception or myth that happens. Another one is that, unfortunately, often when people come to see us, their relationship, or even if it's individual, it could still be their relationship that's in trouble, right? Like it's, I feel like people wait too long to come to therapy. I've said to clients before, why did you wait till your relationship is on life support before you show up? Because now it's going to be harder to revive those, right? And so that's a struggle as a sex therapist that I have, is they've waited until the problem is a really, really big problem. And then now we have a really big problem to solve, right? So resistance is another issue. Clients are coming to therapy maybe because their partner made them, but they don't want to be here, which means they're not sure they want to get better. Right? They'll say that they do, but then they don't do the things to help them get better. Right. And so, do you really want to get better? Because I don't really see the movement here. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So that can be really frustrating. That can be a disadvantage to this job. Those are the things that came to my mind right away.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I'm going with the kind of first one. I think one of the funny things, I don't know if it's a challenge. Sometimes it is. Like, I feel like there's a perception of me outside of, this is more like not with clients, but outside of, the thing I always say is when people I would ask, like, oh, they'll ask me, what do you do? And my go-to is usually like, oh, I'm a therapist or I'm a counselor. And then it goes one of two ways. They'll be like, okay, and that's enough. And I'm like, all right, I'll continue, nice to meet you. Or then they'll go like, oh, do you focus on something specific or whatever? Like, do you have a specialty? And I'm like, okay, here we go, And I'm like, actually, sex therapy, And then that goes, it's like a decision tree. That goes one of two ways, where one way they'll go like, oh, okay, cool, but so did you know it's gonna snow tomorrow or so? I don't know. They'll totally change the subject. Yes. Like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Like, all right, cool. And then actually the other way, it'll be like they're interested. Like, whoa, that's interesting. What kind of people you see? And they're like more open and stuff. So I think one of the challenges, it's fun sometimes, but it's I can tell there's some perception of me as a sex therapist, whether that's like, oh, he must be having tons of sex, or his sex must be like crazy, or like, or almost like that's kind of weird. Let me maintain distance or not talk about that or something. I don't know. There's like, it changes. Like, I guess I wonder if, I don't remember what it was not to be a sex therapist. It's been a while, but as a regular therapist, I think there's already initially a little bit of that view of like, oh, you're a therapist. But I feel like it's that then on steroids of like, you're a sex therapist. I'm like, oh, I don't know. It's just this weird, like, who do I share it with? I don't mind sharing, but some people don't fully ask. And I'm like, do I start with that? It's just interesting, like navigating the perception of it. I mean, I'm fine with being a sex therapist, but it's just other people aren't always, I guess. I don't know,
It's true. Like, people aren't used to talking about sex openly. Like we are, and
challenge.
Yeah. So I think when people ask, they don't know what to do with that information. Like we talk to clients about stuff that the person who's asking us what we do don't talk to people about, right? And so
right.
They treat us being sex therapists like its own kink, right? Like it's its own fetish or something.
Right. Like, oh, what are you into?
Don't talk about that. That's for you in the privacy of your own.
Yep, for sure. Definitely. Yeah, and it's that too. Like, another challenge I just thought about too is like taming my my sex therapy brain or whatever in my personal life. Luckily with my friends, they're pretty open. Like my close friends, I'm like always saying stuff, and they're like, and my Heidi's always like, Jose, like stop, you know what I mean? But that's another like a semi challenge of like, okay, what kind of things do I say in public that's not in the therapy room, you know, talking about sex? Like, how many penises can I get away with in this like social interaction? It's crazy.
It's true.
Man. Yeah, it is true.
I've been in conversations too with my friends, and then I'll just start talking about sexual stuff, and then they're all like staring at me, and I'm like, oh, that's a work conversation, isn't it?
I forgot where it was.
Yeah.
It's so funny. It's funny. Oh man. As far as clients, I think the biggest one that comes to my mind, his sexual trauma. I feel like that for me personally, like that's like a tough one. Just like hearing people's sexual trauma. Generally, I think I do a decent job of like, okay, maintaining that distance, but still every once in a while it's just like, oh man, that sucks. That's a lot. Like hearing the things that their parents did to them, or dad or uncle, or like teacher, whatever, like any of that stuff. I'm just like, oh my God, like that's crazy. You know, so that's like a pretty intense, I would say, part of my art, what I do. And I don't even really, like when it comes to like got people with like minor attraction or something, that's like a big like red flag thing. Like that doesn't really bother me as much as the sexual trauma. It bothers me more. I feel like it's kind of interesting, you know?
I agree. I think I'm in the same boat. And for me, it's been remarkable to me how many times when somebody tells me about sexual trauma they've experienced, that I'm the first person that they ever told. And likely the only person.
Yes.
Right. They don't want to tell anybody else ever.
Yeah. Not even their like significant other.
Right.
Insane.
And so it's, to me, that's very heavy. Like it's a heavy burden for us to bear, because we're the only keeper of the secret. Right. And so, I mean, the client feels better dumping that on us. Right.
Yes.
But there's been many of the guys that I've worked with where they have been sexually abused and they've never told anybody, or sexually assaulted. Guys are sexually assaulted too. Or they're victims of domestic violence, or, you know, it could be any of those things, and they've never told anybody else. And so then they're sharing that with us, and we have to carry that secret for them.
Yeah.
And so, because it's not safe for them to talk to anybody about it, because they're afraid of how people are going to react. And so that's another, I don't know if it's a negative part of the job, but it's not something that makes us feel good.
Right. Yeah, I definitely think it can be both. I think there's definitely that responsibility. You know, for example, I'm just thinking about past like female clients with sexual trauma. I've had not a crazy amount, but some, you know, there's that and same with guys just in general, but there's that responsibility when someone shares to you something that deep and that their sexual trauma. You know, you're like, it's like a thought that comes into my head. I would never do it, of course, but it's like, man, like someone could really like exploit that, or someone could really like say, oh, go in therapy in general, you can do that, but especially with sexual trauma, like, you know, go and do this. And as a therapist, you know, they're very vulnerable with you, so there's a responsibility to like, you know, keep their confidentiality in a secret, but then also not do harm, or not like have them do something that they're gonna regret, whatever. You know what I mean? Like it elevates that responsibility even more, because they're like, here, their whole chest is open. And you're like poking around, and you could really do some damage if you wanted to. Again, I would never want to, just to clear that up. But you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, it's
scary.
It can be a heavy job. It can be a daunting, you know, responsibility that we have. Also, like that just reminds me of like putting people back together before they leave session. Right? Like they come in here and they dump all this heavy trauma on us or whatever, and we're talking about these heavy topics and like how to have better sex. And then we have to they have to go to work or something afterwards, and we have to kind of put them back together again so that they can go out in public and be function as a normal human. So there's that too.
Yeah, for sure. So that I think that again, that could be a challenge, but also I feel like, and that transitions to what I was thinking next, like what are the rewarding parts of our jobs, like something like that, having that the heavy burden, heavy responsibility for me, then seeing progress from that, like seeing the person be so low or whatever, controlled by the sexual trauma, then to have some progress. For me, that's a big rewarding part of the job, but for you, what are some rewarding parts of specifically being a sex therapist and stuff?
First thing that comes to my mind is helping people fall in love again. Right? Like, because again, if they're coming as a couple, which I do see a fair amount of couples, that it's, if they're coming for couples therapy, that means that according to them, there's something wrong with their relationship, and then fixing that issue so that they can be happy again. Which I do tell my clients, I feel like my job is to make you happy. And so whatever route that takes, my goal is for you to be happy. And so that is really rewarding when people are happy after, X number of sessions. They feel like they can be happy again or happy together with their partner.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the ones that are nice to see for me is like couples where you have a session, or at least we're at a tough spot, and then later on seeing a session where, like, specifically, I think recently I noticed, like, I had a session with that couple. We've been doing a lot of good work, and then I saw them out by their car, or somebody commented to me, like, they were out by their car, like, hugging, and like they were standing really close and like being all sweet with each other. I'm like, oh, sweet, all right. I helped with that. Obviously, they did all the work, but I helped with that. Nice, So seeing that like pay off of, like, with couples specifically, or like in session, they're holding hands more now than they were before. You're like, oh man, that's cool. The little things I think are rewarding for me.
I don't know if our clients realize that when we open the door and we see them in the lobby, we know what kind of session it's going to be based on if it's couples, like how far apart are they sitting? Are they looking at each other? Are they talking? Or are they just both in their phones, like, tapping madly on their phone? So we can tell a lot when in the first 3 seconds we see somebody.
That's so true.
But another thing that I thought that's rewarding is, like, with our if it's individual clients that we're seeing, especially for problematic behavior, like, for example, porn addiction, seeing them, the porn not having as much control over their life, or not, whatever their addiction, it's not just porn addiction, right? So just seeing that they have more control over their life and the addiction has less control, that's really rewarding to me. So I'm like, look, you can do it. You're doing it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a clear difference. Like, it's almost like they look different too, like their countenance, if you will, or whatever. It's so interesting, that difference, like when they're really deep in their addiction or porn, compared to later on when they're like more with it or whatever. Even if they're still using porn fine, but just the look of it is different. It looks like they're in control and they're like actually making sound choices. I don't know. It looks different. It's crazy.
I think it's shame. Like, I think because it's what I think that you're talking about is like they look differently.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It's not just they have a different look on their, like, they actually physically look different. And I think it's like when they first come to us, there's a cloud of shame on them, and it's almost like a dark cloud, right? Their face. And then when that starts to lift, they're becoming the person they were meant to be, right? And so, they physically look different. They're lighter. They have a bounce in their step, maybe, or whatever, right? They're happier.
It's insane.
Hopefully.
It's insane. Yeah, for sure. Cool. What advice would you give to people that are considering, like, doing sex therapy, or like thinking that, okay, maybe there is an issue and when sex is involved, whether it's couples, whether it's individual, whatever, like, what would you say to someone that has an issue like that, that's considering it or is hesitant? What would be some advice for people seeking sex therapy?
As a client?
As a client,
Okay.
yes. Sorry.
I thought maybe you were saying do the program.
That could be another question. To a client, yeah.
Well, I guess the answer is the same. Is do it, right?
Yeah.
If you're thinking you may possibly need a sex therapist, do it, right? Go to a sex therapist, find a sex therapist, because if you don't need it, your sex therapist is probably going to tell you, right? Because there's so few of us that we're all really busy. And so if you're coming to a sex therapist and you don't need a sex therapist, your sex therapist is probably going to be like, this is great that you're coming to see me and I can see you about your anxiety or depression or whatever your issue is. But you don't need a sex therapist, right?
Right.
But most people that show up do need a sex therapist.
Right. If they're considering it.
Yeah. And so, I think it's probably not going to cause damage in your relationship or you as a person, right? So if you're thinking about it, do it, right?
Worth a shot.
Yeah, because we're designed to help people, right? It's like and if you get help, that's a good thing, right? And I know it's intimidating. I know it's scary. I tell clients all the time, you're so brave for picking up the phone and walking in here, because it had to be intimidating, but we're not that scary, right? And so it helps to have an unbiased person. It helps to have somebody that we're not in your relationship, so we don't have a vested interest in you picking your underwear up off the floor.
Right.
Like we don't, so we can be unbiased and be like, well, what about this other side of the story, right? Like let's explore both sides. And how do you think your partner feels when XYZ happens, right? So we can kind of take an unbiased approach and see both sides and help people to be happy.
Yeah, definitely. And like most, if not all, but most sex therapists, I would say, have heard it all. I say that to clients a lot. I don't know if it's effective or not, but
yeah,
I will say that like I've heard it all, like most of it. Like nothing you say in here, is gonna be like, oh my God, you did that.
Yeah.
And if it was that different, you wouldn't know anyways. But
right.
Side note, I don't tell them that. But generally, you know what I mean? Like I've heard of the extremes, whatever variety of things. Like it's not gonna bother me. This is a place for you to feel safe and you can literally say whatever you want. It's I still am not surprised, but it's still funny to me how clients will filter themselves, both like their language, for example. They'll say, oh shit, or something. Oh, I'm sorry for my language. I'm like, I don't care. Like you should be able to curse here if you want. I don't care. Or they'll say like, oh, this might be TMI, but this is what I was doing when I was masturbating. I'm like, it's literally never TMI. Like I want all the information possible, So it's just interesting that how clients continue to filter. I think just maybe a tip would be, generally, if you're going to a sex therapist, they probably have heard a lot of things. So, you sharing your thing is not, most likely will not have a negative reaction. You won't get a negative reaction back of like, oh my God, you did that? That's what you're doing?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, no, they're empathetic and they've heard it all before,
The way I explain that to clients is I say, I literally talk about this all day long. I tell them, I know these questions, nobody's ever asked you these questions before. You've probably never talked to anybody about this stuff before, but I talk about it all day long. I tell them, you're not going to embarrass me. You're not going to hurt me. You're not going to break me. Right. Like it's, you can share stuff with me. And then like when you said, I've heard it all. And if a client does come up with something new, then we're going to treat that as we like that because now we get to learn something new. Right.
Exactly. We're like, oh, okay, let me go research this or talk to my colleague or whatever. Yeah.
And so we're going to learn about it. I had a client recently that the issue he had, I had never had anybody with that issue before. And it's a pretty uncommon, actually, from the research that I did when he came, I'm like, oh, this is not a super common issue, but it was really harmful for his life. Right. And so I researched it and I learned more about it, and now I know, and so now I'm happy because I
Yes.
learned something new.
Yes.
And so it's not going to bother us. It's actually, we're going to get excited about that because we get to figure it out.
Yep. Right. I mean, think about it in the context of medicine. If you have a surgeon that, you have a surgery that you want to do that's a little more in depth, and if you have one surgeon that's done it maybe once, 2 times in the last year, versus a surgeon that literally does that specific surgery like all day, every day, like you're going to pick that guy because, or girl, excuse me, that person, because that it's like second nature to them. They're just, they've done it over and over and over. Like that's kind of the same thing. Like we've talked about it over and over, and we've talked about most things a lot every day, all day, like it's no big deal to us.
Yep.
I know it's a big deal, but
we're way more comfortable talking about it than our clients are.
Right. Exactly. For sure. Cool. Sweet. I think that's kind of what gives a gist of us. What, you have any other closing remarks on being a sex therapist, or like the work that we do, or whatever? Any other closing remarks before we wrap this thing up?
I think just to let people know, like we're in this to help people. We're in this to help clients solve problems, to get to the bottom or the root of their issue. There's no like secret sauce to it, right? It's just like we're in this to help people and to help them be happy. And unfortunately, sex is an issue that causes people to be unhappy sometimes. And so we want to help people solve that problem. We're open to talking about it and open to helping people.
Yep, definitely. And again, I think the therapy with a twist is really just therapy,
right?
With a little bit of a twist. If you think about, you would go to a therapist, the regular therapist people go to all the time, and it's pretty well accepted these days, more than it was in the past. It's the same thing. It's just we're talking about sex.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Therapy with a twist. Like, it's fine. Cool. Yeah, thanks for listening to our podcast today. Feel free to check out our social media, Wet Dreams Podcast with a Z, on every social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all that stuff. Check us out. Thanks for listening.
Yep. Thanks for joining us.
The Wet Dreams Podcast and any content posted is intended for general information, educational, and entertainment purposes only. We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional, diagnosis, or treatment. Listeners should not disregard or delay in obtaining a medical advice for any medical or mental health condition they may have, and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.